Hello everyone, I am here. I have newly reorganized bookshelves that I did for some reason, and I'm here to review the debut novel, Empire of Silence, by Christopher Ruocchio, which I hope I am pronouncing correctly. But let's talk about this. I would describe this as a sci-fi book that I think fantasy fans, like myself, will enjoy. Let's get into it. So, the first question is, what is Empire of Silence, the first book of Sun Eater, about, for those who don't know? This is a first-person retrospective tale, and the first thing we learn is that the future version of Hadrian, who is our protagonist, destroyed a sun, and that sun was not the sun of a star system that no one lived on. It was the sun of an inhabited system that, people were around and killed a lot of people. And this is him telling his life tale about how he ended up being in this situation where he destroyed a sun. And we go back really all the way to his birth. And it starts off by saying that he is the son of... The premise for the start is going to sound familiar, and that is because... in the same way, for those who are familiar, that the start of The Eye of the World has deliberate parallels to The Lord of the Rings, and then takes it in a different direction, I would say this has deliberate parallels with Dune, but then takes it in a different direction. And I know the author has said this series is kind of his response to one of the primary themes of Dune. For those of you who haven't read Dune, it explores... how, charismatic leaders can be very untrustworthy, and people who are considered heroes often can be the downfall of groups of people. Sun Eater is kind of supposed to be the response of, maybe heroes sometimes are a good thing, but that is what he says, but it starts with a deliberate parallel to Dune. So, similarities you have to Dune. It's in the distant future. I'm not exactly sure how far in the future, but it's thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And our protagonist, Hadrian, is the son of the Lord of a planet, because it's got a similar thing to Dune, where they've kind of got rid of the whole democracy thing and kind of have lords of planets. I think the explanation for why this happens is that because communication and travel take so long, that the people who are in charge of individual planets end up being lords who are directly trusted by the emperor, because obviously it's an empire, and so they kind of have to leave people more in charge, because the person who's in charge of a planet has to be someone or a family that is personally trusted by the emperor, because the emperor couldn't control, if a planet, the leader kept changing every 4 years, because, it can take 50 years just to get to a planet, because, the galaxy is big. Anyways, so you've got that, is kind of similar to Dune, and Hadrian plays the role of Paul Atreides, except Paul Atreides... his dad kind of really liked Paul Atreides. Hadrian drew the short end of the parent stick compared to Paul Atreides. Instead of getting Duke Leto, he's stuck with Lord Alistair. Which, first off, don't name your kid Alistair. He's going to be a dick. 100% of people named Alistair are dicks. Okay. Sorry to anyone named Alistair who's watching. You should go change your name and ask your parents, why did you name me Alistair? Come on. It's the most, evil name ever. Don't name your kids Alistair. As always, I don't like to get too much into the summary, because I like many people, like going in somewhat blind to the plot of books. I don't just like to be surprised in the second half. I like things in the first start of the book to be able to surprise me as well. So, I'll say things don't go particularly well. Which, that happens in every book. Anyways, and this follows Hadrian through the early years of his life. And so the next thing I always like to talk about is kind of sorting the book for what style of read it is. And writing style-wise, this is very much kind of fanciful, high prose. Like, it remind more like Hobbes or Rothfuss or people like that, and not the more like utilitarian, very straightforward prose you'd expect from like Brandon or Jim Butcher or R.F. Kuang. He very much, Ruocchio is trying to really make the way he puts sentences together themselves a part of the enjoyment of the novel, and he very much succeeds. I really, really enjoyed reading this, and one aspect of why was the language. He also fits quite a bit of Hadrian's like philosophizing and meanderings out of this. I kind of joked that early Hadrian kind of does the people think this, but they're wrong, actually this, but he gets away with it because usually it's actually really good. And also, this is not, as you would kind of expect from a response to Dune with more fanciful language. It's not a particularly fast-paced book. It's very much a kind of, not slow, but slower and very character-driven and more, it's not as much like one specific plot. So it's not like, say, let's pick, I don't know, a series that literally everyone has read. It's not like The Lord of the Rings, where it's like, we have a ring, and we have to destroy the ring. Like, very clear goal, let's go do it. It's a lot more... It's not as close-ended. Like, it's not as clear what the goal is. It's just Hadrian going through his life and all the conflicts and tribulations and trials that he has to go through. And, how he... the end point is going to be go from kid to destroy son, killing billions of people, and the series is about connecting the dots. So definitely things happen, but it's very much not a focused book, which, if you know what books I tend to like, I'm totally okay with this. I am very much happy to read a book that wanders when it needs to, that can be, that doesn't take the direct path to where it's trying to go, and The Empire of Silence very much does not do this. And now in terms of like how dark it is, I think it's clearly not a grimdark novel. I mean, as I said before in What's It About, it's kind of the response to Dune saying like that heroes can be a good thing. So obviously an outlook, and the main character definitely does some morally questionable things. I mean, destroys a son, but he doesn't do that in this book, in his defense, but even in this book, he does do some morally questionable things. But he is, like, it's not a story of someone who's a complete bastard, so destroys a son because, haha, get wrecked, fools. It's the story of how someone who's a good person ends up in a position, I mean, I haven't gotten to the part where he destroys a son, but I'm assuming it's going to be how a more fundamentally good person can get in a situation where that's what ends up happening. Really curious to see how it gets there. And so now, there is an elephant in the room for Empire of Silence, because if you look at negative reviews of Empire of Silence, the overwhelming, most common complaint is people call it a Name of the Wind ripoff. And in some ways, I do not totally blame them. I don't think they're, like, coming from completely nowhere. I don't agree. And I think there's a couple similarities that then, like a couple broad similarities and a couple like really specific sentences that then get kind of exaggerated into basically saying that Hadrian is Koth and it's just Name of the Wind in space, which there are clearly, it's not. So the first is there are 3 sentences in this book that are almost quotes from Name of the Wind. And I'm going to start with one of the first ones because it's on like page 2. Which probably gets people in the wrong mood right off the bat. And he's saying where he's going to start the story, and he says, "So let us bypass history, sidestep the politics and the marching tramp of empires, forget the beginnings of mankind in the fire and ash of old earth, and so too ignore the Cielsen rising in cold and from darkness. Those tales are recorded elsewhere, in all the tongues of mankind and our subjects. Let us move to the only beginning I've a right to, my own." Now I wasn't planning on doing this, but I have the power of editing. So I am now going to get the beginning of Name of the Wind, and you can see what I mean. So I have the Name of the Wind version. I'm on page 52. This is absolutely not a spoiler for the Name of the Wind. Don't worry, it's literally the founding of the book. Anyways, this is Koth about starting his story. I see you laugh. Very well. For simplicity's sake, let us assume I am the center of creation. In doing this, let us pass over innumerable boring stories, the rise and fall of empires, sagas of heroism, ballads of tragic love. Let us hurry forward towards the only tale of any real importance. His smile broadened. Mine. So those are clearly similar. They're not exactly the same, and there's a few like this. I think there's one that's more similar. It's also one sentence and not like on page 2. But if I was like a mega Name of the Wind fan, and it was like a first retrospective story of someone who's starting young and then is going to end up doing very bad things, and it's mysterious how, I can see why Name of the Wind fans get annoyed by that. And then there's also one plot line that is like 2 chapters in Empire of Silence, around a third of the way through, I think. That's very similar to a plot line in The Name of the Wind. As far as I can tell, the last 2/3 have remarkably little similarity to Name of the Wind, or really any other books. In fact, I think the last 2/3 are kind of different than any book that I've read really ever. So I kind of see where it's coming from, but I don't agree. Oh, I guess, I'm sure there are some people who are extremely disingenuous, who are like, the main character has a love interest. He stole that from The Name of the Wind. But if you think that having a main character in first-person retrospective, having a love interest, is automatically like a copy of Name of the Wind, no, it's not. Go away. That's not how that works. If that was, everything would be a copy of, like, whoever wrote the first book. Everything would just be a direct copy of that, because most stories have a love interest. Anyways, and Ruocchio has, he hasn't said himself that he definitely has homages to books, so it definitely has some things that feel similar to some other books. I would also put forward that it has a huge amount of original content, and combines things in a way that I have not seen done before. And one aspect of that originality is how alien or extraterrestrial life is handled in this book. And it's done in a way that I've never really seen before. Usually you see one... this being said, bear in mind, I'm not well read in sci-fi at all. You might notice that of this big old shelf back here, which Empire of Silence will be right next to the Wheel of Time Companion, the only other sci-fi book on here is Dune. And then there's like a couple more that I've read. I'm not well read in sci-fi, so there's probably other examples of this being done, but it's the first time I've seen it. Because usually what I see is either there are just no aliens mentioned, like Red Rising or Dune. It's just humans. Or at least in Dune Book 1. There might be in the future books. I don't know. But you know what I mean. Or you see things like Mass Effect or Star Trek or stuff like, or Star Wars, where there are aliens, and they are generally much more advanced than humans. So humans go out into space, and there's like this big society of aliens who are way more advanced than them. Or you get like Independence Day, where much more advanced aliens show up and like attack Earth. I'm not going to say what it is. I'll let you guys figure that out. But Empire of Silence does neither of these things, and I think what it does do is, in my opinion, more interesting than either of those. Maybe not more likely, maybe less likely, but more interesting. And in general, the way alien life is handled is so fascinating. Like, obviously, the Cielsen, which you heard from my one sentence and is on the back of the book, are kind of another dominant alien race that humanity has warred with. But in general, there's a lot of alien life that's very different, like very, very different from human life. I think this is becoming more common in sci-fi. I kind of have a theory that it's a response in people's mind who watch like Star Trek and Star Wars, and all the aliens are just like humans with added stuff. And then it's people kind of who watch that and was like, that's like a pretty unlikely way for alien life to exist, and then came up with their own thing. And that's definitely what he does here. And the way alien life is introduced is really well thought out and really interesting. And it's delivered in a not info-dumpy way, which in general I think is something Ruocchio is very, very good at, is delivering information in a way that makes it so there's like a ton, like the world is so like vibrant and it feels huge, but it didn't feel like he was really info dumping at any time. I really think the world building in this is incredibly impressive. And yeah, so that's kind of what I think on the originality. Like, I see where people are coming from. I don't think people are just like making it up out of nowhere. I think people are taking a couple things that are legitimate similarities and then extending that to a point that's somewhat unreasonable. Where it's like, you know, it's like Name of the Wind, the character has a love interest. Anyways. So now let's actually talk about what I like about this book, which is most of it. I really love this book. It's one of the best debut novels I've ever read, or one of my favorites. There may be a couple I like more, but this is up there. And why do I say it is sci-fi for fantasy? This focuses on the type of thing that you would expect a modern fantasy book to focus on. It's very character-driven, and it's very much following like the life of a character. And it's just, it has kind of the similar feel in that way to fantasy books. It's less focused on like technology or a sci-fi related ideas. So I very much think if you, like me, are primarily a fantasy fan who wants to try a sci-fi book, I would absolutely recommend this. I mean, I also say the same thing about Dune, but a lot of the time people are worried for Dune just because of how old it is. You shouldn't be. Read Dune. Dune is amazing. But anyways, this is a great option if you want to try more kind of modern sci-fi, because it feels like it has a lot of stuff that the fantasy fans would want. And one of those is that everything goes wrong for the main character. Ruocchio is not nice to Hadrian, although Hadrian is also not nice to Ruocchio. Random funny thing. At one point in like the retrospective part of the writing, Hadrian describes the prose as poor, because he's saying he just can't describe something, and he's like, I can't describe it with this poor prose. And I thought it was really funny because the protagonist is insulting the author, which, I don't know, I found it amusing. Speaking of which, I love the way first-person retrospective is done in this book. There's a lot more commentary done by the present version of Hadrian than you would see in something like Name of the Wind. Where like Name of the Wind, it's mostly just told like it's first-person past, and then there's like, then it'll zoom out and go to like third person, and there will be more like commentary. It definitely has some, but this definitely has quite a bit more commentary from present Hadrian, and every time I felt like it added to the story. I think Ruocchio really took a line that was pretty hard to balance, which was not feeling like it was overdone of having present Hadrian comment on things. So I think probably took the harder path for retrospective. I imagine it's probably easier, like for the Farseer trilogy, for example, there's much less commentary from like current fits. I think it's the harder path to balance and get right to have more, but I think Ruocchio did a really, really good job at it, in my opinion. And another thing, I'm going back to the originality thing, another thing I'm going to mention, there's a lot of sci-fi novels where people have personal shields. And I can tell you for sure, and I was 90% sure of this, and then I literally asked Ruocchio. If those who don't know, Christopher Ruocchio is active in Mike Book Review's Discord. So as I was reading Sun Eater, I could literally ask the author questions, which was super cool. In terms of, he also has a YouTube channel, so in terms of fan interaction, he's as good as any author is. I know Brandon Sanderson gets a lot of praise for this, as he deserves to. But if you want to support another author who does it basically as well, or maybe even better, then give Ruocchio a try. Anyways, so I asked him, like, hey, Ruocchio, personal shields, do you include those just because you think sword fights are really cool and you want to make guns less viable? And yes, that's the reason. That's the reason they all do it. That's why there's personal shields in Red Rising. He wants the combat to be with the razor, like, which are the melee weapons in Red Rising, which the shields don't work against. That's why personal shield... Well, I don't know why Frank Herbert did it. But, I mean, it was probably because sword fights are cool. And there's personal shields here because sword fights are cool, and if your personal shields can stop bullets or energy weapons and not sword fighting, it means you can include sword fights. And I really like the sword fights in here. They're maybe not, like, action isn't going to be, like, a primary draw to this book, There is some action, and I've been told the future books have more action. I've also been told the future books are better in almost every way, which I'm incredibly excited for. But it's not the main draw, but I think the action, it never got drawn out, and it was always engaging. And this was a very, very well-rounded read in the aspects I enjoyed of it. I don't know if I would give it a 10 out of 10 in any category. I don't really do that by category, but if I was going to, but I would give it I wouldn't give it an A+. If I was giving Ruocchio a report card, he would probably not get any hundreds, but he'd get an A in a lot of things. He had an A in world building for sure. The world building was delivered in an extremely natural way. It was incredibly well thought out. The world feels huge. It was super interesting, super unique. I love the characters. Hadrian, I think, is a great protagonist who has a lot of personality, some depth, interesting relationships, and a unique voice in terms of dialogue. You believe his bad decisions, which is, I think, a good sign of a character. Great supporting cast as well. A lot of people who I can see are going to be really iconic. They felt distinctive. They felt interesting. They felt human. The prose, it's beautifully written. I think, I literally read one quote, and I read the similar quote from Empire of Silence and Name of the Wind, and I think it says a lot, because Name of the Wind is a book whose prose is, pretty much universally praised, that I actually prefer the line in Empire of Silence. And, that's going to continue. He absolutely, if you're someone who enjoys books for the way people put sentences together, not just for what the story is, I think there's an excellent chance you will like this book. And I also think there's a lot of really interesting discussions on themes and topic like that. I guess plotting would probably be its weakest aspect, but it actually, I think for what it is, it's paced extremely well, which is that this, I think, is a lot of times a sign of a good pacing, where my brain will start to go, hey, maybe this plot is about to get drawn out, and then on the next page, there's a big evolution or things change. And that happened, I think, twice in this book, and I never thought any plot lines were drawn out, which I think, as I said, is a sign that there's a plot line that's really similar to Name of the Wind, that's much longer in Name of the Wind. And it's only 2 chapters here, and they're not super long chapters, because the book is 60 chapters or something. Oh, also, here's something I didn't realize that will be very useful for you. There's an index. So if you don't know what a word means, it's probably here. I realized there was one of these on page 500. Mark Lawrence does this well. Please do what Mark Lawrence does, authors. I'm not going to check the back before I read the book. So if you have useful information, like an index or a dramatis personae, please put it at the front. Please. I'll really, really appreciate it. If you want, you can even do what Erickson does and kind of split it and have the stuff that you can know and isn't a spoiler at the front, and then have some stuff that you can only know later at the end. But, I'm not going to check the back of the book before I start reading. Because I'm paranoid that if there isn't an index, I'll open the last page and my brain will randomly remember a sentence and I'll spoil the book for me. But anyway, it has a dramatis personae and an index. Now you know. Use the information that I did not. But this has not been a particularly coherent review, but it was a particularly coherent book. And I'm giving it a score of 9 out of 10, which means I did give it 5 stars on Goodreads. And everyone tells me the next books are better, which I'm super excited for, because I can say, even if I didn't continue the series, I can almost guarantee that this book, if I didn't continue the rest, would be on my top 10 book list at the end of the year, which this probably won't be, because it's going to be restricted to 1 per author, and everyone says the next books are better. And it's universal. It's the people who really like Empire of Silence say the next book is way better, and the people who are lukewarm on Empire of Silence say the next book is way better. So it's not just the people who don't like it, it's the people who like it as well. So I'm super excited for that, super excited for this series. This is one of the series I have, this is really the only ongoing series I have, maybe Dune, but I haven't continued Dune in a while, that I think has a very, very good chance. In fact, at this point, considering everyone says this is the weakest, if this is not on my top 10 series that I make in 2022, because I'm going to do that every year, it will be a surprise. It will mean either something went wrong, or I had a just shockingly good reading year between like 10 months or 11 months between now and my next top 10 list I do, because I love this. It's like a fantastic opener to a series. If this was the best book in a series, like even if someone told me like, yeah, you know, the next books, they're not quite as good, but they're still good, I would still be pumped for this series because this book ruled.